start, ma'am.
A very pleasant good afternoon to one and all. It is said by Plato that the beginning is the most important part of the work. So, to begin with today's second session of Shakespeare's certificate course, I, Dr. Meenakshi Vasnik, on behalf of all the cluster institutions, feel privileged to welcome our respected learned delegates, eminent scholars, distinguished participants, and all the members of Shakespeare's Society of Central India who are excited to be here on the first day of certificate course on Shakespearean Studies organized under the aegis of Shakespearean Society of Central India in collaboration with departments of English of HISLOP College, Nagpur, SANTAJI Mahavidyalaya, Nagpur, RAJKUMAR KEWALRAMANI Kanya Mahavidyalaya, Nagpur, and J.M. Patel Arts, Commerce and Science College, Bhandara. I heartily welcome the organizers of this certificate course, Dr. Pranoti Chakravarti Madam, Dr. Urmila Dabir Ma'am, Dr. Usha Sakure Ma'am, Dr. Priya Vanjari Madam, Dr. Prashant Shelke Sir, and Dr. Vikas Dhumne Sir in today's event. I take this prestigious opportunity to welcome the coordinators of the certificate course, Dr. Veena Joseph Ma'am, Dr. Karthik Panikar Sir, Dr. Nihal Sheikh Sir, and Dr. Madhvi Mohril Ma'am in today's session. We are honored to have Dr. Priya Vanjari Ma'am, an exceptional administrator and an eminent academician known for her wisdom and knowledge. Madam is the principal of Santaji Mahavidyalaya, Nagpur. I feel a great honor to invite Dr. Priya Vanjari Madam to address our participants with the opening remarks. Over to Priya Vanjari Ma'am.
Thank you, Meenakshi Ma'am. A very good afternoon to all. I'm audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are.
Yesterday, the inauguration of this academic festival took place, in which Dr. Pranoti Chakravarti Madam, President, Shakespeare Society of Central India, chaired the ceremony, while Dr. Urmila Dabir Madam, Chairperson Board of Studies English, RTM Nagpur University, graced the occasion as guest of honor. Dr. Dabir Madam grew in flashback mode, and she tried to recount the moments when she had organized the first certificate course in Shakespeare Studies. She had expressed her gratitude on behalf of all the colleges, and to mention that Dr. Supant sir, she had also took the liberty of mentioning how the origin of theatre, English drama, started. It was in a moving form, and the earlier version of this studies was also in a moving form, hopping from one college to another. It is about some 20 years back. Now we have taken a very different form, that is an online platform. And online has its own limitations. We saw one limitation yesterday. Dr. Supant Bhattacharya sir could not make his presentation due to certain technical glitches, as it was mentioned in the morning session. These are beyond our human control, sir. We totally agree. It is beyond our control. But of all remain deprived of an academic talk by teacher who himself is an astounding actor. Sir, we were lucky to see some of your roles enacted by you, and the drama field which you have such a great, magnificent hold. And now we are lucky, more luckier to have with you today's session, Dr. Supant sir, Professor HISLOP College. I can call you, sir, Professor HISLOP College now, with a congratulatory note. Sir, the topic which you have taken is the purpose of mystical phenomena in Macbeth. As I was mentioning, Macbeth being very close to my heart. The reason being, I am taking finally a literature student, BA. So come the 6th semester pattern, and we are totally into Macbeth. And this experience, Dr. Subir Dhar, in the morning session, made it more magical. Just mentioning the important thing of the knock at the doors, bringing Macbeth and Lady Macbeth back to reality. Reality, in a sense, they are that uneasy feeling which Shakespeare allows to create sympathy in the audience for Macbeth, that temporary feeling, because it makes them realize, especially Lady Macbeth makes that this realization, let us go to our quarters and wash our hands. And this washing of hands goes on and on. In the same way, Supanta sir is going to deal with a very important phenomena today, because this is a point of deliberation, sir. Important point. Mystical. What? And these witches come and we go deep into it. Sir, if you have any plans for enacting the same in the near future, let us know. We all will be delighted because we are all Shakespeare's fan. We are joined by this particular certificate course, and with this, I think we all give credit to this society and the certificate course for bringing us all together and listening to such a good discourse today, which will be done fully justice. It will be justified actually by Dr. Supanta sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam, for your insightful address. Your thought-provoking opening remarks for today's session created an outstanding impact on our participants to know about Shakespearean literary genius. To take us in the literary voyage of Shakespeare, today we have with us an eminent personality and an erudite academician, Dr. Supant Bhattacharya sir, as today's resource person. I heartily welcome you, sir, in today's session. I take this opportunity to introduce to Dr. Supant Bhattacharya sir, who is working as a professor in English in HISLOP College, Nagpur. Sir has acted in over 150 plays in various languages like Hindi, English, Bangla, and Marathi. Sir is a member of Click and Shakespearean Society. Sir is an editor of poetry journal edited Rhythmic and has won All India Poetry Prize conducted by British Council Poetry Society of India. Sir has completed UGC project on Rabindranath Tagore and has several volumes of translations published by Oxford University Press. It is very interesting and proud to know that Sir has acted as a lead role in various stage shows as Mercutio in the play Romeo and Juliet, Macbeth in Macbeth, Claudio in Hamlet, Shylock in Merchant of Venice, and Malvolio in Twelfth Night. Sir has also directed Julius Caesar, a historical play of Shakespeare, and acted in the role of soothsayer. All his shows are produced under professional levels. Sir's exceptional knowledge in Shakespeare study is truly immense and spellbound. What could be so special than to celebrate the birth anniversary of Shakespeare with the second startup of a literary discourse through the presentation of a great devotee of Shakespeare like Dr. Supanta Bhattacharya sir. So today, sir will deliver his scholarly discourse on a very fascinating topic, the purpose of mystical phenomenon in Macbeth. I feel immense pleasure to invite Dr. Supanta Bhattacharya sir to begin his scholarly presentation. So over to Supanta sir. Sir, please unmute yourself.
Am I audible now?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. You're audible.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vasnik. Good evening, friends. And thanks to Dia for her extremely kind words. I'm hugely indebted to Shakespeare Society. I've been associated with this organization from day one. And thanks to Pranati ma'am and my second mentor, Urmila ma'am, for supporting me all through. And I'm also extremely grateful to my wonderful head of the department, Dr. Veena Joseph, for extending all kinds of support. I mean, even today, before today's session started, Veena ma'am was showing me how to change the background and how to handle, the various aspects of it. aspects of this platform, which I must confess I'm not very comfortable with. I'd much rather have a physical, a live class anything. Friends, Macbeth is often regarded as a very jinxed play. And in fact, there's a theatrical convention whereby actors don't refer to it as Macbeth, Shakespeare's Macbeth. They call it that Scottish play. They believe, there's this superstition that if you take the name of Macbeth, then something or the other goes wrong. I was a bit skeptical about this till yesterday. All right, we kept on saying Macbeth this, Macbeth that, and see what happened. All right, had H.G. Wells been alive, he would have written a sequel to The Invisible Man. He would have called it The Invisible Speaker, because the speaker just disappeared. Jokes apart, I've prepared a presentation which I'll try to share with you. I hope I succeed in this. Just give me a second. This presentation would last for about 40-45 minutes, as would my lecture, after which you could ask questions, and hopefully we'll all wind up by 5. Is the first slide visible?
No, not yet.
Madhubala Ralte, madam, please unmute your video. Please turn off your video. You are audible? Yeah. I request to Madhubala. Yes, sir, you are. I'm just giving instruction to Madhubala Rade, madam. Please turn off your video.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are
Yes, you
clearly
are.
audible. Now your screen is processing, sir.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you
Yes,
are.
you are. Yeah.
And could you see my slides when I switched it on?
No, sir. No, your screens are not visible.
Achha, slides not visible. Just a second.
You'll have to share screen, sir.
I'm trying that. So what's happening is a tab. Okay. Now I'm sharing with me. You tell me if I'm audible.
You are always
Am I still audible?
Yes.
You're audible, Supant.
Can you
Please
hear me?
continue. Your screen
Just
is not.
share
Am I
the
audible?
screen.
Yes, you're audible.
Yes.
Kindly
you are
start your
audible.
screen, share screening. Yeah.
Yeah, the process. It went off.
Okay, just let me try. Is it visible?
No.
Now?
No.
Still not visible.
Oh.
Okay, I think I'll dispense with. Usha, are the slides visible?
No, not yet.
I'm trying the sharing option. I don't know why what's happening.
If you are at the same place, Veena, why don't you help him? Please go.
Visible now?
No, it is not visible. Supant, you better start your lecture, and Veena,
Yeah, I
please
guess.
go where Supant is and
Veena,
help him
can you
to
help me
share the screen.
Yeah.
Yes.
Share the screen. One final time. Is it visible now?
No, no, not yet. Yeah,
It is
yeah,
processing.
it is processing now.
Okay.
It is catching and breaking in between, I think. So.
Yes, sometimes it goes off.
It is getting connected. Your
No, it's
screen
going
is
on.
getting.
Right.
Veena has
Okay,
reached
again,
there,
the
na,
network
Supant?
issue or something. Yeah, Veena ma'am is here. Yeah, pretty fine. Right. Okay. Yeah. So, friends, as I was saying, I'm still audible, Usha?
Yes, you are audible.
All right. Okay. Just one final time. I'm still audible?
Yes.
All right. So, Macbeth, as I was saying, is often considered to be a play that is jinxed, and because of various reasons. Some ascribe it to the witches, some ascribe it to the fact that this was a play which involves a king's assassination. Now, of all tragedies written by Shakespeare, Macbeth has the maximum number of mystical phenomena. Right? Mystical as well as mystifying. Very, very supernaturally charged. And as you all know, the play opens with the three witches who give Macbeth and Banquo, who provide a prediction to Macbeth and Banquo that lays out the plot of the rest of the play. Then, as the play progresses, Macbeth sees a phantom dagger. He hears different voices and is haunted by the ghost of his murdered comrade. That is, of course, the brother figure, Banquo. And the vast amount of supernatural events actually does not really come as a surprise, considering that Shakespeare certainly wrote the play as a tribute to his monarch, King James I. Okay, the critics believe that the play was written around 1605 or 1606. And 1606 was a very, very interesting year in the life of Shakespeare. Okay, he wrote three of his masterpieces in this 1 year. The greatest Shakespearean critic, James Shapiro, he has written a book called 1606, A Year in the Life of Lear. Okay, and the year of Lear, 1606, the year of Lear. Just a minute, my friend Vicky is here and he help us to. Can you see the slide?
No, sir. It is yet to be processed.
Hello.
Meenakshi,
Not yet?
I think you have not
Okay.
released the option that sir can operate his thought.
May I help you, ma'am?
Please, please, could you?
Yeah. Hello.
Any help would be welcome. Slide maybe. I think they have to. Somebody has to give me a permission to use this. ये टीम्स में है इसमें मुझे ये टीम्स ये नहीं गूगल मीट है हाँ शेयर तो करिए लेकिन ये स्क्रीन आ रहा है ये मुझे पीपीटी दिख रहा है
Sir, you stop your screen sharing first. Stop the screen sharing. Okay.
Yes, I have stopped it. Yeah.
Now minimize your PPT in the scroll taskbar. Please minimize it.
I have done that. Yes, I have minimized
Okay.
it.
Now go to the present now. Present now option. Choose your entire screen,
Click
sir.
that. Yes.
Then actually
Okay,
you
I'm
need to
closing that.
click inside the box. Yeah.
Share.
Yeah.
inside
Then
the
the
box.
share button will turn blue actually.
Okay. Yes.
Then if it turns blue, then you need to click it.
Click share. I'll click share. Okay.
No. Yeah,
Now
it
tell
is
me if you can
processing.
hear me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it again
It's,
goes
now
off. That's
it's
the problem.
the minimize PPT. You need to open it. Yeah. Yeah. Now it is.
Now it is visible. Where
Now
is
go to
visible?
slideshow
Go to
and
slideshow
yeah,
Okay.
and start
perfect.
from the beginning.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much for your help. Thank you. Am I still audible?
Yes, yes, you are audible. Please go ahead.
So, as I was saying, Shakespeare wrote this play almost definitely as a tribute to his great patron, King James I, the British monarch, and he was also with the ascension of King James I, the Tudor dynasty came to an end, and James I was the first ever Stuart monarch, the first king of the Stuart dynasty. Now, this king, the king of Great Britain and Scotland, James VI of Scotland and James I of England, he had a tremendous belief in the power of witchcraft. And this belief ran so deep that James actually led several witch hunts through Britain. And on top of it, he also wrote a text called Demonology. We'll come to that later. But this text argued that witches are real. Right? And witchcraft is a legitimate theological study at the time. And led by King James, England treated these mystical, supernatural phenomena as a very real presence at the time when Shakespeare wrote Macbeth. As I told you, 1605 or 1606, the very first decade of the 17th century. Now, witches are perhaps the most ostentatious and primary focus of King James's attention, but they were by no means the only form the supernatural was to take. You know, ghosts, for instance, in this play we have the ghost of Banquo, visions and dreams, bleeding corpses that continue to bleed after death, possession of devils, all these elements, they had a very important role in Jacobean culture. I tell my young student friends that the civilization of Queen Elizabeth I was known as the Elizabethan age, and King James, that age from around 1603 to 1623 was known as the Jacobean age or the Jacobean culture. Now, I'll argue here in this presentation that Macbeth, the play, complicates and questions the supernatural, but eventually denies it authority and power altogether. Point I'm trying to make is the play leads the protagonist, Macbeth, to believe in the supreme authority of witchcraft. But by the time the play ends, Macbeth comes to this realization that witchcraft is actually very vacuous. It's utterly futile and does not have the authority that it claims. Now, the status of the supernatural within the play, it has been a long source of argument and debate for critics. I'll give you a few examples. Charles Lamb, he asserts, I quote, from the moment that the witch's eyes first met Macbeth, he is spellbound. That meeting sways his destiny. George Kittredge was like-minded. He argued nuns were like the three fates of ancient Greece. Not Macbeth, but Lady Macbeth. Robert Bridges argues that the darkness and power of the witches combines with the darkness and influence of Lady Macbeth. Macbeth students will know that Lady Macbeth is often referred to as the fourth witch in the play. Extremely unfair in my opinion, and rather misogynistic. And it makes both hell and home leagued against Macbeth. The three witches plus Lady Macbeth. These four women, they make life miserable and absolutely infernal for Macbeth. James Curry expounds on that argument. He states that Lady Macbeth assumes the evil powers of darkness and, I quote, deliberately wills that they subtly invade her body and so control it that the natural inclinations of the spirit toward goodness and compassion may be completely extirpated. Thus, Carey is shifting both the blame and supernatural powers from the witches to Lady Macbeth. However, to understand the nature of the mystical and the supernatural in Macbeth, the wide range of contemporary beliefs in Shakespeare's England. That also we must take into account. Some people, most, the majority of Elizabethans of this age, they believed wholeheartedly that witches possessed sinister and formidable powers. Others believe that yes, witches do exist, but they are also extremely limited in what they could actually manipulate. If you are faithful, if you are devout, then the witches can't really touch a hair on your head. And however, because of the influence of science, the growth of science, to which I'll come in after a couple of slides, growing majority rejected any belief in the supernatural at all. So it was a society which was very, very conflicted. Believers, non-believers, fence-sitters, all of them together. And this conflicting society formed the audience for whom Shakespeare had written his play. Initially, when the play begins, for the first couple of acts at least, Macbeth seems to align with the believers. The play, I'm referring to the play Macbeth. The play seems to align with the believers. But if we examine each supernatural event more closely, specifically the witches, the dagger, Banquo's ghost, the voices Macbeth hears, and the pageantry of the dead kings. If we look at these supernatural events, they show how the play questions the function, the power, and the reality of the supernatural throughout the play. Then, in this case, it becomes possible to interpret the supernatural and their supposed quote-unquote power of darkness as purely atmospheric. There's no deep core belief in the supernatural. Their function in the play is one of theatrical power, because it's very dramatic, because it's visually very effective. Shakespeare has introduced this. So the purpose, as the mystical elements in Macbeth, the purpose behind it is purely to create an atmosphere, purely to create an eerie, a very, very macabre, a very terrifying atmosphere in which the dark play could be staged. Ultimately, the supernatural elements of the play, they symbolize Macbeth and Lady Macbeth's guilt and act as external representations of their psychology. Now we come to, is this slide visible? Elizabethans and witchcraft?
Yes, sir, it is visible.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, Supant.
Sure, thank you. As I've already mentioned, in the early 17th century, King James I believed very strongly in the reality of the supernaturals. But they were slowly being phased out. They were slowly being marginalized by the scientifically aware audience members. Now, this was the first work which was written in the year 1584. And the writer is the gentleman you see to the left of the panel. His name is Reginald Scott. And Reginald Scott wrote this book called The Discovery of Witchcraft. And Reginald Scott claims that even if in this text, Scott initially asserts that there is no such thing as witches, and those that have been burnt at the stakes, those that have been executed for witchcraft, are actually quite innocent. Now, King James was rather offended by this, what Reginald Scott said. And in the year 1597, the King of England, he was yet to be the king. Queen Elizabeth was still alive, but he was looking at the affairs, the internal and the external affairs of England as the regent of England. Of course, advised by Queen Elizabeth's Council of Ministers. So in 1597, James came up with this book. That's King James, to your left. And the name of the book, as I've already said, is Demonology, in form of a dialogue, and it's in 3 parts. By the grace of God, King of England, Scotland, France, and Ireland. Okay, so the first edition appeared in 1597, and this is the facsimile of the 1603 edition. And in that book, King James singles out Reginald Scott, and he calls him all kinds of names. He describes him as, quote, an Englishman who is not ashamed in public to deny that there can be such a thing as witchcraft, and so maintains the old error of the Sadducees in denial of spirits. Now, what happened is, just a few years before this, King James had in Scotland, he almost was drowned in a shipwreck, and he believed that witches were responsible for this near disaster, and quite a few witches, they were brought to trial, and those unfortunate women, they were burnt at that stage. And in order to justify this action of his, of killing witches or women who are accused of witches, James wrote this pamphlet, Demonology, and which challenged the discoveries of Reginald Scott. Now, what was happening in the rest of the world, in mainland Europe around this time? To the left, you have Nicholas Copernicus. And Copernicus published a very influential scientific treatise called De Revolutionibus Orbium Celestium. And here, he posited the very literally earth-shaking, the heliocentric theory. And the heliocentric theory removed Earth from the center of the universe, and it brought the sun to the center. From geocentric, the solar system came into existence. From geocentric, it now became heliocentric. And a little around 50 years after this, the gentleman to your right, can anybody recognize who he is? Students, please. Yes, friends?
Galileo.
Galileo Galilei. Very good. Who was that?
Smita.
Okay, Smita, yeah. So this was Galileo Galilei, okay? And what he did was he invented the telescope. And the telescope allowed humanity to become more aware of the geographical nature of the universe. And all of you know how Galileo had to suffer because of this. As explains that before these scientific developments, I'll quote, before these developments, humanity existed in a geocentric universe. Hell and purgatory were in the center of the earth. Heaven was beyond the outmost celestial sphere. Earthly space was not yet widely perceived. Unquote. In about 100 years, this concept was radically different. Quote, humanity was now spinning on a planet that orbited the sun. The location of hell, even its existence as a physical place, was in question, and purgatory had been largely abandoned. The conception of a distant clockmaker god who worked through witches and the physical world was becoming outmoded. So now people had started laughing at the concept of witches, witchcraft, the supernatural, and the Renaissance scientific temper was slowly establishing a kind of a stranglehold on the late Elizabethan and early Jacobean consciousness. Now, if it was no longer clear where God and the devil existed in space, how they operated in the physical world also became very unclear. Now, supernatural beings were seen as a kind of a connecting link between the heavenly and the hellish or the infernal space. But once the certainty of God and devil is removed, the destruction of the link between God and devil also was gone. Skepticism now became the central belief system of society, and society was forced, compelled to re-examine its conception of the very nature of God and evil. However, still believers and skeptics recognized and appreciated the power of witchcraft as a symbol. Although they all approached it from different perspectives, both believers and skeptics still associated witchcraft with political as well as female transgression. So please don't blame the Elizabethans or the Jacobians for this, but in general it was a very misogynist society. And by performing witchcraft, the witches were breaking certain bounds, certain norms. They were transgressing into the male domain. Non-believers, while rejecting the supernatural reality of witches, could still respond to the symbols of both treason and the dangerous. Powerful women that the witches embodied. And I had a wonderful discussion with my BA final year students about how the witches subverted patriarchy. And, these were basically healers, and they performed other necessary functions for women, which patriarchy could not really see eye to eye with. And therefore, these women, these very essential elements in the feminine domain of the Elizabethan age, they were often branded as witches, and unfortunately, they were executed with state sanction. After King James I gained an intense interest in witches and demonology, because as I told you, that shipwreck, King James I was on his way to Denmark to claim his bride, and a series of storms plagued his party. And later, a woman who was already under suspicion for being a witch, she confessed that she had created the storms. Those of you who have read the Macbeth, you'll remember that wonderful scene where the three witches talk about drowning a sailor at sea, and because the sailor's wife refuses to give chestnuts, roasted chestnuts, to one of the witches, and so they plan a revenge, a kind of a mode of revenge whereby they would all go to the ship where the woman's husband was a captain, and they would drown the ship, and they would make his life utterly miserable. So this woman confessed, and James's perspective of witchcraft, now it became synonymous with treason, not only a crime of deviance, but a crime against the state, the crime against the monarch. And in Scotland itself, dozens of women, they were accused of witchcraft, they were brought to trial. Of course, these were false trials. The witch hunt continued even in England, and many women, they were either imprisoned or they were burnt at the stakes. So the witches now posed a demonized threat to religious purity and to male supremacy, and it was they were considered a direct threat to the King of England. So witchcraft was now conceived as a religious, a theological perversion, as well as political treason. As you can see, witches were always women. Plotting against the king of the nation's monarch, was just one of the attributes assigned to witches during King James's reign. One variant of the term wayward, W-A-Y-W-A-R-D. Okay, so now I won't digress, and it can take up an entire lecture why Shakespeare uses that particular term. Wayward sisters, and wayward implies so many things. Wayward implies deviance, it implies departure, it implies a lot of things that we are so fond of in our study of theory and culture. Many contemporary critics argue that the overwhelming predominance of women as the victims of such accusations is simply the product of the misogyny of a patriarchal society. In demonology, King James argues that, I'll quote, the moral weakness of women was recognized as one cause of their susceptibility. Whatever the reason, the women most commonly accused of witchcraft were either, quote, old, lame, clear-eyed, pale, foul, and full of wrinkles, poor, sullen, superstitious, and papists. Almost uniformly, they were all Roman Catholics in a Protestant universe, or such as know no religion, in whose drowsy minds the devil had gotten a fine seat. So you can imagine the scenario. These women were hardly in their proper senses. They looked ugly. They could not cogently argue their case, and who were extremely pathetic to look at. They were brought to trial. How could they defend themselves? And they were instantly branded witches. They were removed from the boxes, and they were promptly, within a matter of days, they were either hanged or they were executed, or a very macabre way, a stake was driven through their hearts and they were buried almost half alive. So very barbaric times when Shakespeare wrote his play. In many ways, the witchcraft discussion becomes a presentation and a way of both explaining and exploring the dangers of giving women authority and power, as well as the political transgression of treason. And please remember, all this was happening at a time when the monarch on the throne was a woman, Queen Elizabeth I. So it's an age of contradictions. It's an age of paradoxes. All right. Although the Englishmen, the Elizabethans, they loved good Queen Bess, as they called her. On the other hand, such women, they were considered to be transgressors against patriarchy, against masculine norms, and they were summarily eliminated from society. Michel Foucault uses some examples from this in his study of madness. Witches scholar to scholar, and even King James's witch claimed to use storms as a primary weapon against him. They themselves were not that powerful. And Stuart Clark, it's a very interesting book called Thinking with Demons. Stuart Clark argues that society often viewed witches as symbols of chaos and destruction. And Clark says that the impression of Europeans who saw disorder and witchcraft as mutually entailed phenomena, permitting multiple transfers of meaning, and that it was natural to set the scene for treatments of one by invoking the other. In this way, witches themselves do not necessarily bring or create chaos or destruction. Instead, their very presence represents coming disorder. Now, while the play was being performed, many in the audience, particularly King James I, they would have seen the witches as very powerful agents of darkness and ghosts as agents of divine intervention. However, there would have been many rational members also in the same audience who would have aligned themselves with the skeptics and rejected the existence of magic, ghosts, or witches. These playgoers would interpret the witches and the ghost and the other supernatural elements that Macbeth sees as hallucinations from a diseased mind, a fevered mind. All right? So some critics say that, okay, maybe Macbeth subjectively saw Banquo's ghost. All right, even the parade of the kings in the fourth act, that could have been Macbeth's hallucination. But please do not forget the fact that the first appearance of the witches was in front of both Macbeth and Banquo. And Banquo, by no stretch of imagination, could be referred to as a vividly, as a fevered brain, or a man with a great deal of imagination. Banquo, as opposed to Macbeth, is a rationalist. Banquo is very rooted to reality. Banquo, there's no reason why both of them should have been hallucinating and have seen the three witches. The three witches of Macbeth, they are hellish women at the center of an assassination plot against the king. Their very presence establishes those political and gender themes within the play. But while the play, Macbeth, does give its audience stereotypical witches, Shakespeare is constantly questioning their power, their authenticity, and their role within the play. And even Macbeth, towards the end of his dramatic career, when he realizes how Burnham Woods can come to Dunsinane Castle, how Macduff could be born not of a woman. All right, he realizes the witches have tricked him, and they are not really any figures of authority or power. Yes, as I told you, this is the first scene. You can see Macbeth and Banquo on horseback being confronted by the witches. So the play begins with the witches who appear absolutely real, entirely, what's the word I'm looking for, entirely tangible. And it suggests that the play is not concerned with complicated, conflicting views of the supernatural, but is merely seeking to please the views of the ruling monarch. Because James I believes in demons and witches, Macbeth has written this play to please his monarch. There are other references too. Cleon's who escapes the murder attempt. Right? We are told that Cleon's descendant, right, after quite a few generations was James I. And there are other references in the play which kind of make us realize that Shakespeare basically wrote Macbeth. He took the historical elements from Scottish history and wrote a play which basically was not so much a crowd pleaser as a king pleaser, as a monarch pleaser. When shall we three meet again? In thunder, lightning, or in rain? So right from the beginning, the opening scene, even before we come to the fair and foul court, the witches set a very dark and a very chaotic tone to the play. And the very first question explicitly informs us that these witches are going to return at some point and they will be a presence throughout the play. The second question fundamentally implies, Shakespeare students will notice, within a Shakespeare play, the weather always carries symbolic meaning. Okay, there is a lot of transferred epithets happening here. There's a lot of pathetic fallacy happening here. Okay, I won't go into the figures of speech that Shakespeare uses. And the coming of the atmospheric storms alludes to the coming of turmoil and darkness. The play is almost set in semi-darkness. And the only time there is absolutely clear sunlight is in the very final scene when Macbeth has been beheaded and Malcolm assumes the throne of Scotland. That's the only time when directors use full light in the play. The witches answer each other's questions by chanting, "When the hurly-burly's done, when the battle's and won, where the plays upon the heath." This is from Act 1, Scene 1. And their answers show the witches' knowledge of the political events at the time. They are aware that a battle is going to end soon because they have dictated the time and place of this mysterious meeting. It seems that the witches will have the control and authority of this coming encounter, where Macbeth will be forced into a subordinate role. Even that final famous lines, "Fair is foul and foul is fair, hover through the fog and fill the air." This line suggests that the witches have a connection with the meteorological elements, the weather elements. As a result, the main function of the witches does not appear to be action-oriented, but simply to establish both the literal and thematic atmosphere of the play. What Shakespeare has done is, he has very carefully, very deliberately constructed these witches so that they appear to represent the stereotypes of both aspects of the demonology debate. You know, the evil, vengeful witch of King James's demonology and the begging crone of Scott. Reginald Scott suggested in his book that these witches, they are unfortunate beggar women who go from house to house and they are suspected of witchcraft. So Shakespeare sort of appeases both these elements, both the believers. One witch describes how she intends to torment a sailor whose wife would not share her chestnuts with her by sailing to his ship. And like a rat without a tail, I'll do. On the one hand, this witch seems to fulfill the traditional expectation of a vindictive, vengeful witch. But when she also fulfills Scott's expectation of a witch really being just a beggar woman. Alright, why would a witch beg for chestnuts from a sailor's wife? She could easily snatch them or, create her own chestnuts. Why would she beg for them? So Shakespeare is suggesting, maybe indirectly, that these witches were nothing more than beggars, very miserable beggars who were suspected of witchcraft. I'll skip a few parts of my presentation. From the very first lines of the play, the witches' actions concentrate on Macbeth. Whatever they do, everything that they do, everything they speak of is centered on Macbeth. After the first witch's answer, "When shall we three meet again?" and where the place, they give the purpose of that meeting. There to meet with Macbeth. The purpose of the witches within the confines of the play is entirely dependent and centered on Macbeth from the very first lines. In the following scene, their vengeful and mystical musings, they are interrupted by this line. A drum, Macbeth doth come. Before Macbeth even enters the stage, his proximity dictates their actions. When Macbeth and Banquo finally cross their path, they completely ignore Banquo's question. Live you, hail Macbeth, hail to thee, Thane of Cador, all hail Macbeth, that shall be king hereafter. When they finally turn to Banquo, they don't use his name, but simply shout, hail, hail, hail. They tell him his future only in relation to and in comparison of Macbeth. Lesser than Macbeth and greater. Not so happy, yet thou shalt get kings, though thou be none. Even though the play presents the witches as being real and even seems to give them a kind of power over the events of the play, their realm of influence starts and ends with the character of Macbeth. Then, after the witches vanish, Macbeth himself gives an aside that affirms the neutrality of the witches' visitation. He explicitly tells the audience that this supernatural soliciting cannot be ill, cannot be good. And he is suggesting that the choice, the moral choice of his future actions and whether they are ill or good will lie entirely with him, not the witches. At the end of his aside, Macbeth tells himself that if chance will have me king, why, chance may crown me without my stir. Macbeth tries to leave his future to fate and the witches. Yet this very statement suggests that Macbeth has already begun considering to stir, quote unquote, stir against the king. Look at Banquo's line. Banquo, looking at Macbeth, asks, "Good sir, why do you start and seem to fear things that do sound so fair?" So Macbeth literally gives a reaction, a startled reaction. And that implies that the thought of murdering his king had already entered Macbeth's mind even before the witch's prophecy. Now, if this is the case, then the witches can hardly have any power over him whatsoever. They don't inspire him to commit any deed, let alone the murder of his king. Because this sinister idea was already in his mind before he ever met them. Indeed, Macbeth's fearful face, as seen by Banquo, indicates that the witch's prophecy reminded him of his murderous thoughts and suggests that they might in fact come to be. Macbeth's fear lies in the idea that the witches possess the power to predict that he will be king, but that he alone possesses the nerve to kill in order to become the king. So these first scenes with the witches begin to question the nature of supernatural and suggest that their function is primarily to add atmosphere to the play. But the scene of the dagger, Act 2, Scene 1, it latently challenges the reality of this new supernatural event. As Macbeth tries to work through the conflict between his ambition and his moral code, he's trying to summon up the nerve to kill his king. A dagger appears, floating before his eyes. At the very moment of the dagger's appearance before Macbeth, he exclaims, "Is this a dagger which I see before me?" Macbeth himself is questioning the reality of the dagger. He attempts to grab it, but is unable to grasp it. And he says, "And yet he is still. The dagger is appeared, is yet to be revealed." Macbeth questions the nature of its reality by asking, "Art thou not, fatal vision, sensible to feeling as to sight? Or art thou but a dagger of the mind, a false creation, proceeding from the heat oppressed brain? The idea that the dagger could be a hallucination is first suggested by the hallucinator himself. Macbeth himself is not too sure about the real existence of the dagger. It's a very interesting thing. And what many directors do is they choose not to have a dagger there at all. He makes all these gestures, the cutting gesture, or he looks at a fixed point before his eyes, the actor portraying Macbeth, but the actual dagger is never shown. On the other hand, some directors, they somehow use a wired contraption and make a dagger actually appear before Macbeth's eyes. The witches actually appear on stage, alone and in front of Banquo as a witness. They speak and respond to Macbeth, which implies that in some sense, they must be real. But the dagger scene begins to blur the line between what is real, what is supernatural, and what is psychological. Macbeth's encounter with the dagger, this scene, intensifies, it dramatizes the uncertainty of the supernatural. Macbeth cannot determine whether this dagger is real or imaginary. He exclaims, Act 2, Scene 1, "Mine eyes are made the fools of the other senses, or else worth all the rest." He is himself making the argument that his senses are conflicting with one another. He sees the dagger, but he cannot touch it. As such, either his eyes possess a clearer sight than his other senses, or his eyes are the fools for seeing something that is really not there. This scene makes it impossible for the supernatural to be entirely real, because he cannot experience with all his senses. Lady Macbeth never sees the dagger. The play further blurs the line between the psychological and the supernatural when Macbeth hears voices calling to him immediately following Duncan's murder. When Macbeth emerges from the bedroom, his hands covered in blood, he is in a state of absolute shock and horror. Macbeth exclaims to his wife that one of his victims cried, "God bless us," and that the other cried, "Amen." But listening to their fear, I could not say amen. When they did say, "God bless us," I had the most need of blessing, and amen stuck in my throat. Already Macbeth feels as though his actions are beyond any kind of spiritual redemption. At this moment of intense guilt, Macbeth claims to hear ghostly voices. These voices are shouting something. What are they shouting? Macbeth does murder sleep, the innocent sleep, sleep that knits up the raveled sleep of care. The death of each day's life, so labor's part, calm of hurt minds. The voices end by telling him that Macbeth shall sleep no more. These voices are telling Macbeth that he will no longer be able to sleep the sleep of the innocent. And sleep, again, or the lack of sleep, comes to haunt both Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, as we shall have seen later in the sleepwalking scene. In this, it is clear that Macbeth himself is the one that conjuring this supernatural event. He is trying to express internal conflict as an external phenomenon. One of the creepiest scenes in literature, the uninvited guest at the banquet, the royal banquet, and that is Banquo's ghost. Look at all those injuries on his head. This is a subjective ghost. Okay, this is a ghost only Macbeth can see. It's one of the most dramatic hauntings in all of Shakespeare, and it reflects the deterioration of Macbeth's psychological state. Majority of critics tend to disregard the psychological toll that Banquo's murder has on Macbeth. They feel that Macbeth is very casual about Banquo's murder. And it is true that Macbeth does say, "To be thus the king is nothing, but to be safely thus," which suggests that, at least on some level, maintaining the secrecy of the first murder is a priority. But, however, Macbeth's murders don't become less important to his personal psychology, but rather show a progression in Macbeth's psychology as he kills. First, a parental ruler, then he kills a brotherly friend, and finally he kills a mother and her children, Lady Macduff and her kids. And as some critics have suggested, that Banquo's murder contains at least as much and perhaps more emotional weight than that of Duncan. Because Banquo is a devoted friend, a very honorable friend, and they have fought together. Banquo has saved Macbeth's back on a number of occasions, and he's not a co-conspirator in regicide, but somebody who modestly resists each temptation to which Macbeth falls prey. We can interpret Banquo as an alter ego of Macbeth, a better version of Macbeth, a Macbeth minus the dark ambitions. By killing Banquo, Macbeth is almost killing an image of himself. It's probably a kind of a suicide. What Macbeth himself could have been if he had resisted the temptation of the crown. Immediately after he issues the order to have Banquo killed, Macbeth acknowledges the insupportable guilt that will accompany Banquo's death, stating that it would better be with the dead, whom we, to gain our peace, have sent to peace, than on the torture of the mind, to lie in restless ecstasy. With this statement, Macbeth openly reveals that his hopelessness is so deep, that his life has sunk so low, that he now envies the peace of those whom he killed. They are at eternal peace. That escalation of guilt is manifested directly by an escalation of the ghost. The apparition who appears at the banquet now is the very friend who was killed, coming to condemn him in person. He sits in Macbeth's chair, which makes it impossible for Macbeth to ignore him, and further suggests the idea of a shared identity between the two characters. This new ghost is a more concrete and literal image of his guilt and torment, which reflects directly back at him. Yes, sir. Macbeth's control over the ghost of Banquo rejects the traditional belief in the supernatural and strips it of any power it may have possessed. Instead, Banquo's ghost implies that this ghost, like the dagger, like the voices, is a projection of Macbeth's own psychology and guilt. And unlike the witches, these elements, the voices, the dagger, and the ghost, these are definitely subjective and are a kind of a hallucination of Macbeth. Macbeth's final meeting with the witches. It is the final supernatural encounter in the play. And it initially suggests, you can see the cauldron, that cauldron in which the witches have thrown some very interesting elements. And eventually, Macbeth would be shown a parade of kings, a succession of kings. And this is a return to the more traditional interpretation of the supernatural, one where supernatural beings are entirely real, powerful, and influential. I have deliberately kept Hecate, the queen of witches, out of this because, according to most recent criticism, the Hecate scenes are not by Shakespeare. Right? Critics like Shapiro feel that it could be either of the two or maybe both of them, Beaumont and Fletcher, who had introduced the Hecate scene, but they are definitely not by Macbeth. And the witches in this scene appear first, and this suggests a disconnection from Macbeth. Now they live independently from him, and they are slowly dissociating themselves from Macbeth. They are even in the middle of making a potion, chanting the ingredients as they go. And the ingredients consist entirely of body parts and organs of different animals. And my students have made a lot of puking sounds while enacting this scene. And after this final encounter, all aspects of the supernatural disappear entirely, and the play becomes a very hardcore, realistic play. Furthermore, the apparitions gave Macbeth two prophecies. Number one, none of woman born shall harm Macbeth. And the second is, Macbeth shall never vanquished be until great Burnham Wood to high Dunstan Hill shall come against him. Both these prophecies imply supernatural means to bring them about. So the moment these prophecies are made, you start imagining how could this be possible, and you imagine a gigantic Herculean figure who's not born of a woman, and you imagine an entire forest crawling up the incline to the Dunstan Castle. When the prophecies do come true, they turn out to be entirely prosaic and not supernatural in any way. You all know, Macduff says, "Despair thy charm, and let the angel whom thou still hast served tell thee, Macduff was from his mother's home untimely ripped." So Macduff was born by C-section. Okay, he was taken out of his mother's womb by a cesarean section. And coincidentally, I had played Macduff in the play when the play was staged by my theatre group. And true to tradition, it was a disaster of a production. So many things went wrong, and it was not considered one of the best plays of our theatre group, in spite of the brilliant performance as Lady Macbeth by the actress who played that role. And I was playing Macduff. Macduff fulfills the prophecy and is able to kill Macbeth. Not from any supernatural origin, but simply because he had a supernatural birth. And the second prophecy, the forest moving up to the castle, is fulfilled by the simple experience of the soldiers cutting boughs and branches from the trees in Burnham Wood, tying them to their backs, and the soldiers were crawling up the hill. All right, the illusion that this provided was the entire forest crawling up the hill. And Macbeth realizes that he has fallen prey. The sleepwalking scene. Macbeth takes internal conflict and projects it onto the supernatural. Lady Macbeth is the exact opposite. She takes the external supernatural forces and internalizes them. Lady Macbeth's relationship with the supernatural ultimately reflects the journey of the play as a whole, the transfer of the supernatural from the external to the internal, followed by its injection altogether. Lady Macbeth blurs the line between an external and internal relationship with the supernatural. She actively, remember, in Act 1, Scene 5, she calls on the dark forces to consume her, commanding them, "Come, you spirits that tend on mortal thoughts, unsexed breath and death." This powerful passage shows how Lady Macbeth has no hesitation. Her spirits tend on mortal thoughts, not action. She demands that the spirits fill her body and thicken her blood, actions that occur totally within Lady Macbeth's persona. Lady Macbeth's journey with the supernatural begins with a closer proximity to psychology than Macbeth. She accepts wholeheartedly the authority of the witches. But her personal relationship with the supernatural is much more internal. After the murder of Duncan and his servants, Lady Macbeth is more aware of the psychological repercussions of their actions and repeatedly tries to refute the supernatural forces working against Macbeth. She warns her husband like this: "These deeds must not be taught after these days, so it will make us mad." Ironically, the husband remains sane, and it is Lady Macbeth herself who goes mad. Her battle is entirely fought within herself and almost subconsciously. Macbeth, unable to forget the murder, is in constant battle with his own guilt, and that destroys his well-being. Lady Macbeth seems to maintain her composure much more effectively. Consider the banquet scene. There is a clear disconnect between Macbeth and his wife. It's obvious that they are not partners. Approaches Macbeth, saying, "This is the very painting of your fear. This is the air-drawn dagger which you said led you to Duncan. When all is done, you look but upon a stool." Act 3, Scene 4. So in that one aside to Macbeth, Lady Macbeth is refuting the reality of both the apparitions Macbeth has seen, even the one in front of him at the moment. Even her initial perception of the power of the supernatural proves to be groundless in the end. Uh, when Lady Macbeth loses her grip on reality, she loses her mind completely and suddenly. Just like Macbeth, her guilty mind projects supernatural apparitions that recall her past deeds and continues the connection that the play has made to individual psychology and the supernatural. When the doctor inquires how long Lady Macbeth, this is now Act 5, Scene 1, the physician inquires how long Lady Macbeth has been sleepwalking. The nurse informs him, since His Majesty went into the field. This brief statement shows that despite the fact that Lady Macbeth appears not to suffer any guilt, the guilt had manifested itself in her dreams. Her nurse and doctor overhear her muttering, "Why, my lord, why? A soldier and a fear? What need we fear? Who knows it? When none can call our power to account." Which directly recalls the conversation with Macbeth when she had demanded in Act 1, Scene 7, "Art thou afeard to be in the same in thine own act and valor as thou art in desire?" And finally, Lady Macbeth dreams her victim's blood back on her hands. According to the nurse, it is an accustomed action with her to seem thus washing her hands. I have known her continue in this a quarter of an hour, just as when she washed her hands after the murder. When Macbeth looks at his hands and says, "This is a sorry sight," she very dismissively, very contemptuously or casually says, "A little water clears us of this deed." And later on, all the perfumes of Arabia are unable to sweeten her one little hand. With Lady Macbeth, the perspective of the audience matches with the doctor and the nurse who are observing Lady Macbeth. Lady Macbeth is not being haunted, but she is being publicly disgraced. Macbeth the play is so packed with disturbing supernatural encounters that it is easy to allow them to mask and distract from the deeper, more psychological themes. And if Macbeth's control over his own actions is taken away, so must his guilt. Without that guilt, the following lines would lose their poignancy. Towards the very end, all right, now Macbeth is undergoing what Aristotle would call anagnorisis, self-realization. That which should accompany old age, as honor, love, obedience, groups of friends, I must not look to have, but in their stead, curses, not loud, but deep, mouth honor, bread, which the poor heart would fain deny, and dare not. By losing his guilt, Macbeth would lose the only remaining thing that makes him human. He had stepped in blood so far through his increasingly brutal murders that the only evidence of any remaining goodness within his character is this ability to feel remorse. It's true, Shakespeare uses the supernatural to complement the king and enhance the theatrical power of the play. But by simultaneously challenging and refuting aspects of the supernatural beings and events within his play, Shakespeare is able to give Macbeth agency over his own fate. In the end, the play reflects the context in which it was written. It begins by treating the supernatural from a traditional perspective, one that is becoming increasingly outmoded in the growth of the scientific spirit of the age. But by the time the play ends, it rejects the superstitious view and instead embraces the perspective that looks to the future of history. Last slide. If thou hast questions, prepare to shed them now.
If anyone has any questions, you're most welcome to ask. Now is your time. Thank you so much, Supant. That was just amazing. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sir, good evening. Smita here.
Good evening. Yes, Mika.
Yeah. Sir, as you mentioned that the three witches were called weird sisters.
Yeah.
So, do these witches have any resemblance with the three fates of Greek mythology, as in?
Absolutely, absolutely. The number 3 itself, as I told you, another term is the Norse. You know, in Norse mythology, the Norse also were 3 sisters. So
Okay.
three women, the three Furies. All right.
Yeah.
Many of my friends here will remember the family reunion where the enemies
Right.
of the,
T.S.
the
Eliot.
yes,
Yeah.
the family reunion.
So
Where
the
the-
one who spins the thread, the other one
Absolutely.
measures the thread,
Cuts it
and
and
the
measures the
third one
snap.
snaps
Yeah, the snap.
the thread.
Absolutely. So
Right.
Shakespeare must have had all these mythological allusions when he assigned the number 3 to the witches.
Right. And also,
Absolutely.
sir, the word weird also, I believe in Old
Uh,
English, it is correlated to fate. Right, sir?
yeah, the WURD, the etymological word is related to destiny.
Destiny.
So,
Okay.
yeah, destiny or fate as you called it.
Yeah.
But often in Shakespeare, the word wayward is often used as weird. In other plays also, there
Right.
are references. So wayward sisters, not quite normal. Those who don't follow the normative template, those
Right.
sisters. And Shakespeare, being the champion of underdogs that he always was, I feel that he was treating the witches with a lot of sympathy here.
Right.
Okay, but he could not directly counter his king and say that there are no witches. But definitely, by the time we come to the conclusion, we realize that the witches are not really as supernatural, as powerful as initially believed. It is Macbeth himself who is, the perpetrator of his own downfall. Right. So Shakespeare is taking authority, agency away from the witches in the play. And the new scientific age that was dawning in the 17th century, Shakespeare seemed to be aligning himself with that, not with the medieval beliefs of the Renaissance audience.
Right. So it's interesting to know how Shakespeare was also aware of the psychological disorders like somnambulism and
Yes, you know what Sigmund
the
Freud
Macbeth
said.
effect you had mentioned once in the class.
Yeah. Sigmund Freud had famously said that I have only, verbalized psychoanalysis, but writers and poets and thinkers actually discovered psychoanalysis much before we scientists did.
Yes. So it was a beautiful session.
Thank you. I'm so happy.
And the way you acted, your dialogue
I wish I
delivery
could
is
perform it. Yeah.
amazing. Oh, how I wish I would be able to watch you perform one day.
Thank you, Deepti. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, everybody. If there are no further questions,
Yeah. Dear participants, any questions? Please unmute yourself and ask.
all my sound and theory would signify nothing, but I can try. Thank you. Baldev Singh Gautam. Thank you.
Okay, sir.
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, Mr. Gautam.
Can you suggest any special, Shakespeare dramas or stories or poems like something which is not too much fictional and something which is
Uh, it would always be good to start with Macbeth. Macbeth, Julius Caesar, these are very student-friendly plays, and you can start with them and then go on to the other masterpieces. Also read his sonnets. You're a young man, and the love sonnets of Shakespeare should really appeal to you. But remember, there are 154 of them.
yes, sir. In school days also I used to read Shakespeare. In those days we were only having the textbook in Shakespeare, so I was actually very curious to read it, but I never got the chance and the time to read it. So thank you, sir, for your suggestion.
You're welcome.
Dear participants, any questions further?
Yeah. Hello, sir. This is Amita here.
Hello, Amita.
Yeah. Sir, I had one question. Sir, do you think mysticism is a necessary element for theatre and performing arts? And if yes, why so?
not really my cup of tea. I mean, I'm dealing with the mystical here, and there's a world of difference between the two. And mysticism is something I'm a very materialist person myself, and I don't really understand mysticality or mysticism or whatever. And whether it's a part of the theatre, yes, there are practitioners of theatre who believe that performance is a very a mystical thing. But I tend to believe that performance is 90% technical and 10% emotional and psychological. I don't really subscribe to the spirit or the spiritual or the mystical.
Okay,
I don't know
sir.
if that
Thank
answers
you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any questions further?
Sir, can I ask one more?
Would anybody else like to ask something? Or
Yeah, one question is there coming from one of the participants. Yeah, please unmute yourself and ask.
Yes, sir. Do you think that the plays that are real and that are more connected to the people's life, do you think that those kind of plays are more kind of get more attention, get more popularity?
are you suggesting that Macbeth was not real to his audiences? Reality is contextual. What appears rather unreal and rather unusual to you today, at a distance of almost 450 years, was very real to Shakespeare's audience. So, first you have to define reality before we can answer that question. These plays were very, very real to Elizabethan and Jacobean audience. That was their reality, as our reality is extremely tangible and palpable to us.
Thank you, sir.
So thank you all the distinguished participants for your scholarly questions in the interactive discussions, which really created a very catchy and engaging environment. Thank you very much, sir. Your thought-provoking guidance truly served very fruitful to our participants and literary aspirants to unwrap the layers.
If I may say something, a
Yes.
huge thanks to Usha for being so patient with me. She's a buddy from my university days. So there is a lot about me which Usha has been tolerating over these many years. Usha, thank you. Without you, this would not have been possible. And once again, a huge thanks from the bottom of my heart to my wonderful head, Dr. Veena Joseph. If you had not been so supportive, I don't know if I could have managed today. I wish I were here with you yesterday as well. So the fiasco that happened, that would not have. Thank you, Veena ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Supant. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Actually, it's always a team effort. We cannot do anything alone. We need everybody's strong support, unstinting support, I would say rather. Thank you so much, everybody, all the organizers, everybody, all right scholars, people, everybody over here. And thanks, Supant. That was really brilliant, wonderful, really good, I would say, very interesting. Thank you so much for being there. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I deem it a great honor and privilege to propose the vote of thanks on this memorable occasion. So I take this prestigious opportunity to express my deep sense of gratitude to the organizers of the certificate course, Dr. Pranati Chakravarti Madam, Dr. Urmila Dabir Ma'am, Dr. Usha Sakure, Dr. Priya Vanjari Ma'am, Dr. Prashant Stelke, and Dr. Vikas Dhomne sir for their stewardship and resilient support to make this certificate course splendid and successful. So my special thanks to Dr. Priya Vanjari ma'am for her influential opening remarks and gracing today's session. Thank you very much, ma'am. I extend my sincere thanks to Dr. Supant Bhattacharya sir for being the resource person of today's session and enlightening our participants with a scholarly discourse. Thank you very much, sir. And I acknowledge my earnest thanks to the coordinators of this certificate course, their hard work to keep intact the series of this national online certificate course in a very meticulous way. I keep on record to thank all the members of Shakespearean Society for their constant support and motivation. Without a disciplined and extremely engaged audience, this session couldn't have been successful. So my special thanks to such a diverse and dynamic participants for their active participation in large numbers. Bringing up with a new version within the agenda of Shakespearean Certificate course, tomorrow we would meet again with a very eminent resource person, Dr. Supant Bhattacharya, Dean Faculty of Languages and Literature, Professor and Head Department of English, Goa University, who would deliver his scholarly discourse on the very elite topic, Trends in Shakespearean Criticism, tomorrow at 11 a.m. So great is the art of beginning, but greater is the art of ending. So looking forward to our next session with a fresh insight and innovative ideas. So with the consent of Chair and the organizing committee, I do declare the end of today's session. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Wasnik. Thanks to the organizers. Thanks to all the principals and the coordinators of the course. Tomorrow, eagerly looking forward to tomorrow's lecture.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.